In other words, what if it's like a family, and you have a credit card, and several members of your family have access to the credit card, and during a month, one of the members of your family goes out and irresponsibly spends money. You know, chalks up a number of bills that frankly are not responsible. So all of a sudden the bill comes to you, and you as a family, what do? Well, you have a family council, or you might call it something else. Well, the first thing you do is say, what in God's name have you been doing? Let me see that credit card. You take your credit card, you cut it up. That's what we were trying to do in terms of cutting spending going forward. And as an analogy, we were cutting up the credit card for irresponsible spending patterns that had existed in the past. But then the bill comes due. You're looking at the bill from the credit card company. Can you call them up and say you're not going to pay it? Maybe you'd like to, but it doesn't work very well. At least it doesn't work very well for me. You got to pay it. So that's what happens when this question comes up on increasing the debt ceiling. We've got to increase it to cover the debt that's been incurred by the spending that's been going on. So in the past, it's been kind of a regular deal. No big deal, kind of matter of fact, this is something we've got to do. Why was this different? This was different because those of us happen to be on the Republican side, now in control of the House, thought this is a means that we can use to bring to the American people's attention and to our colleagues in the Senate and to the White House the seriousness of the fiscal problem. We know that eventually we're going to have to approve the debt ceiling increase. It would be irresponsible not to pay for the bills that have already been incurred. But it would be equally irresponsible, we thought, not to cut up the credit card. And the only way we can get the action to cut up the credit card, since we only control one of the three levers, the House, because there's a Senate and the White House, the only way to have leverage there is to say we will not vote to increase the debt ceiling unless we have real steps towards getting our fiscal house in order, that is, having real controls on spending. Now, I had a better idea, but 434 other members had a better idea, and 100 senators all had a better idea, and the president had a better idea. At least everybody thought they had a better idea than the one we agreed to. So why didn't we agree to all those better ideas? Because there were 536 better ideas. Every member of Congress had one, every member of the Senate had one, and the President had one. Now, how do you resolve a matter like that? You have to sit down and finally work out what can get 218 votes in the House, what can get sufficient numbers in the Senate, and what will the President sign. Or put it another way, I had a chance about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, to introduce a Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia, to a group, an audience of young people back in Washington, D.C., who are interns for the summer, college interns. And he said an interesting thing, I thought. And I'm never going to forget this, because he said, he looked out to this crowd and he said, what do you think is the greatest protection you have for your liberty or your freedom in this country? He said, no, most people, a lot of people would say it's the Bill of Rights. It's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. You know, it's the First Amendment, or it's the Fifth Amendment, or it's the Second Amendment. And he said, I want to tell you, it may sound like that, but I have seen other constitutions in other countries that are better than ours, at least if you read the words and the words mean anything. He said the Constitution for the Soviet Union sounded like it protected rights better than ours. We know it didn't. He said, so what really is the greatest protection for our liberty, our rights in this country? He said it is the structure of government established in our Constitution. He said Europeans can't understand it. He said, they'll say to me, what do you mean? You mean the elected representatives of the people, the Congress, the House of Representatives passes a bill, doesn't come along? Or the Senate passes a bill, it doesn't come along? Both of them have to pass a bill, it still doesn't come along? It's then got to go to the President of the United States? And if he doesn't sign it, if he vetoes it, then it goes back to the House, and if 2/3 of the people in the House override his veto, that's still not enough, because you have to have 2/3 of the Senate that override the veto? He says, they say that's crazy. It takes a lot to pass a law. And then he said, think about what's the closest parallel we have to a president in England. Prime Minister. The Prime Minister cannot be Prime Minister unless he or she is a member of Parliament. That would be like us saying, unless you are currently a member of the House of Representatives of the United States Senate, concurrently serving in that role, you can't be President of the United States. To us, that sounds crazy. But it is part of a system that our founding fathers established for the purpose of protecting your freedom and my freedom. That is, they didn't want any one person, they didn't want any one party, they didn't want any one faction, or they didn't want any one part of government having so much power that they could make laws like that. Now, does that make it frustrating? Oh my God, does it make it frustrating? Does that make it difficult? Yes, it does. Does that make it look messy? It's like making sausage. You know, we probably wouldn't eat it if you saw it anyway. The fact of the matter is that it's part of the reason we have this tussle back in Washington, D.C. that doesn't look very good, and why I voted, and other members voted for something they didn't think was perfect. Because the system doesn't allow us to do that, number one. And number two, it is set up to be somewhat elongated so that no fad takes over our government like that. So what do I analogize this debt ceiling increase to? Well, I analogize it to a 12-round heavyweight championship fight. We just went through the first round. And I believe the taxpayers are ahead on points barely. But we got 11 rounds to go. Why did the Standards & Poor's bring our rating down, credit rating down? I think because they realize it's the first round, and they realize there's 11 rounds more to go, and they're not convinced that we can go the distance. Some people say we should have had a knockout in the first round. Well, I remember Mike Tyson. He used to have knockouts in the first round, and then over time he found out if he didn't knock somebody out in the first round, maybe he'd lose. If he didn't fight him. Yes, I heard that. But my point is that's where we are. So what did we get out? Why do I say the taxpayers are ahead on points in the first round? Well, we did several things. One is we said we would not increase the debt ceiling by any more than what we would cut. In other words, we said to the President, Mr. President, if you want us to raise the debt ceiling by $1 trillion, we're going to have cuts worth $1 trillion. In fact, we said we're going to have more than that. So what do we end up with? We approved an increase in the debt ceiling of $900 billion, and we got $917 billion in cuts, number one. Number two, we said they have to start now, not 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Why? Because we had to show people that we're serious about it, number one. And number two, if you bring the size of a program down, that is the money expended in year one, it puts you on a glide path to go down further. Because the way the federal government has worked for years and years and years, you should start with baseline budgeting. What are we spending now? As opposed to zero-based budgeting. You know, why should we spend anything? So you start with that. If you cut earlier, your baseline is lower, and you actually have a better chance of cutting further in the future. So we did that. The third thing we said was we were not going to support taxes, a tax increase, a rate increase. Why? Because I can't find a single economist of any repute who will tell you that it makes sense in this downturn in the economy to raise taxes. It may make you feel good to raise taxes on somebody else, but frankly, in this environment in which we ought to be worried about jobs more than anything else, it seems to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What was the other thing we did? We said to the President, we know you wanted more than $900 billion in increase in the debt ceiling because more bills are going to become due. We will give you that next year only if we have cut another $1.5 trillion. We couldn't get agreement on what that $1.5 trillion was, so the next best thing was to set up some sort of committee within the Congress. I would have picked different people, but nonetheless, I'm not in charge, to come up with what those cuts are going to be that amount to $1.5 trillion. Some people said, well, wait a second, they're not going to get serious. The Congress isn't going to get serious. So he said, what can we do to force Congress to actually act? Well, we did, and this may sound silly, but this is what we had to do. We said, if they don't act in 1.5 trillion in cuts, we will have automatic cuts that affect the domestic side, and affect the defense side. And then our side said, wait a second, it all shouldn't come out of DOD. I mean, so we expanded the definition to security. So it's the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, intelligence agencies, and Department of State. Now, on my side of the aisle, we don't want the cuts in security, and that is across the board. On the other side of the aisle, they don't want the cuts on the domestic side. It was made so that neither side wanted it. It was made so onerous and odious that we wouldn't want it to force us, to force the committee to do serious work, and for us to take seriously the work they do. What was the last part of the agreement? There is a requirement that we must vote on a balanced budget constitutional amendment. We have to. It is required. Now you say, what's the big deal there? We haven't voted on a constitutional amendment to balance the budget in 15 years. 15 years ago, the House of Representatives passed it by a 2/3 vote, which is what is required in the Constitution. The Senate missed the 2/3 by 1 vote. Now look, I will grant you, having a constitutional amendment to balance the budget isn't the panacea, it's not the silver bullet, doesn't solve all problems. But I just ask you this. Do you think if we had a balanced budget constitutional amendment in the Constitution over the last 5 years, we'd be in the mess we're in now?
Yes.
Well, some people think, yeah. California doesn't have a specific balanced budget constitutional amendment. I will tell you what California has, because I had to deal with this when I was Attorney General, I had to interpret it. California has something which requires, well, let me put it this way. We had to interpret what it was. When Pete Wilson was governor and the legislature was dominated by the other party, we had a $4 billion deficit we were looking at. They came to me for my opinion as Attorney General. Why? Because the Attorney General has to sign off on all bonds that go out on behalf of the state of California. They get bond counsel that signs off on it. They get the Treasurer of California that signs off on it, and the Attorney General has to sign off. What do I have to do? I had to say that it met with all of the standards required by the California statute and Constitution. So we had to take a fresh look at the so-called constitutional section that requires a balanced budget. And we went back and we looked at what, when it was written, and then we looked at the interpretation during the Great Depression. And we came up with this interpretation. It was called the Lungren Doctrine at the time. It is that because there's a fluctuation in receipts and tax revenues, you know, some months you get higher, some months you get lower, you could have a period of time crossing a fiscal year, crossing the end of one year going to the other, in which your revenues do not match your expenditures. So, interpreting the California Constitution, we said you can only go across a fiscal year with bonded indebtedness, that is, go out to have people buy your debt, so long as in good faith you believed you could pay it all back in the next fiscal year. You couldn't do it if you felt in good faith that all you would do would be to roll over that debt in the next year. The governor wasn't real happy with me, the legislature wasn't real happy with me, but they had to follow it. We balanced the California budget within 18 months. So from my experience, I don't know what subsequent attorney generals have done, because obviously we're not doing the same thing, because you see California rolling over their debt all the time. We didn't allow that. The only reason I bring that up is my own experience has been when you have an outside discipline, you will see that those within the decision-making responsibility tend to finally make the responsible decisions. So I happen to believe that's important. So those are those are the elements of the proposal that we passed through, and it means we're going to have some tough times ahead. One of the things we did was we set up this thing, the committee has to report to us by the 23rd of November. Now, if you're looking at your calendar, that's just before Thanksgiving. We're supposed to act as a Congress by the 23rd of December. If you look at your calendar, that's just before Christmas. So that's also, let me tell you, the calendar does drive decisions in Congress. When you start singing Christmas carols on the 24th of December, it usually means you're getting close to making a decision. So it's been set up in a way to try and force decision-making on this. But that's all it does. Doesn't guarantee it. I think it's a good step in the right direction, but it's not enough. That's where we find ourselves right now. One last